I stood at the airport, my suitcase at my feet, passport in hand, and stared at the departure board with a mixture of terror and exhilaration I hadn't felt in decades. 73 years old, and this was the first time in my life I'd be traveling alone. Really alone, without my late husband, without my children, without anyone telling me what I should or shouldn't do. My daughter Margaret's words from 3 weeks ago still echoed in my ears. "Mom, your place is in the home. You're too old for these ridiculous fantasies. What will people think?" What I did next would leave my entire family speechless, but in that moment all I could think was, why did I wait so long? My name is Evelyn Parker, and for 52 years I've been the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect grandmother. I'd spent my entire adult life within the carefully drawn boundaries of what was expected of me. I married young, just 21, to Thomas, a good man who worked hard and provided well for our family. We had 3 children, Margaret, Robert, and Susan. I raised them in our comfortable suburban home, attended every school event, cooked thousands of meals, kept an immaculate house, and never once complained about the dreams I'd quietly tucked away in a corner of my heart. Travel. Adventure. Seeing the world beyond the 3-mile radius of our neighborhood. Those dreams felt selfish when there were children to raise and a household to manage. Thomas and I had always said we'd travel when we retired. "When the kids are grown," he'd promise me, squeezing my hand across the dinner table. "When we have time, Evie, we'll see everything." But life has a way of making liars out of the best-intentioned promises. Thomas suffered his first heart attack at 64, just 2 years after retirement. The second one, 3 years later, took him from me on a Tuesday morning while he was reading the newspaper in his favorite chair. Just like that, the man I'd spent half a century with was gone, and with him went all those someday plans we'd made. The grief nearly broke me. For months after Thomas died, I moved through the house like a ghost myself, unable to shake the feeling that I'd wasted something precious. Not my marriage. Thomas had been a good husband, but time. The time we'd promised ourselves. The adventures we'd postponed. The world we'd never seen together. My children rallied around me during those dark months, and I was grateful for their presence, even as I felt increasingly smothered by their concern. Margaret was the worst. My oldest daughter had always been controlling. She'd inherited her father's practical nature but none of his gentle warmth. She began stopping by every day, initially to check on me, which I appreciated. But those wellness checks quickly morphed into something else, supervision. She'd inspect my refrigerator, comment on the dishes in my sink, question my decisions about everything from my medication schedule to my choice of television programs. "Mom, are you sure you should be watching those travel shows?" she asked one evening about 4 months after Thomas's funeral, finding me watching a documentary about New Zealand. "Don't you think it's a bit morbid? All those places you and Dad never got to see." I'd stared at her, startled by the casual cruelty of the observation. "I find them inspiring," I said quietly. "Inspiring?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mom, you're 73 years old. The time for inspiration is past. What you need is stability, routine. Maybe we should get you interested in something more appropriate, knitting maybe, or a book club with the other ladies from church." Other ladies. As if I'd already been sorted into some generic category of elderly women whose individual personalities and desires no longer mattered. I didn't argue with her that day. I'd spent a lifetime avoiding conflict, smoothing over tensions, keeping peace. Old habits die hard. But something had shifted in me during those months of grief and reflection. Watching Margaret reorganize my kitchen cabinets without asking. Hearing her talk about me as if I were already an invalid who needed managing rather than a person with agency, I felt a spark of something I hadn't experienced in years. Anger, yes, but also something more powerful, defiance. The travel magazines started arriving at my house about 6 months after Thomas's death. I'd subscribed to them secretly, like a teenager hiding contraband from her parents. National Geographic, Travel Plus, Leisure, Wanderlust. I'd pore over them in the evenings, dog-earing pages featuring places that called to me. The temples of Thailand, the fjords of Norway, the markets of Morocco, the ancient streets of Prague. I wasn't entirely sure what I was planning. The idea was still so vague, so impossible seeming, but the magazines felt like windows to a life I might still claim if I was brave enough. Margaret found them one day while she was tidying up. "Read. snooping through my living room. What is all this? She demanded, holding up a copy of Travel Plus Leisure like it was evidence of a crime. Robert and Susan were there too. We'd been having our weekly family dinner, a tradition Margaret had instituted after their father's death. Mom, are you obsessing over travel again? This isn't healthy. I enjoy reading them, I said, keeping my voice level despite the heat rising in my cheeks. Is that a crime? Of course not, Robert interjected, ever the peacemaker. My middle child had always been the diplomatic one, though I sometimes wondered if his constant desire to smooth things over meant he had no real opinions of his own. But Mom, Margaret has a point. Maybe you're dwelling on things that can't happen instead of accepting where you are in life. Where I was in life. 73, widowed, and apparently expected to quietly fade into the background of my own existence. And where exactly am I in life, Robert? The sharpness in my tone surprised even me. He looked uncomfortable. I just mean, you know, at your age with your health concerns. What health concerns? I interrupted. I'm in excellent health. My doctor said so at my last checkup. Mom's right, Susan offered tentatively. My youngest had always been the kindest of my children, though she lacked the spine to stand up to her siblings. She is healthy. For now, Margaret said ominously. But what happens when she's not? What happens if she falls or has a medical emergency and she's alone? Dad's gone. She can't take care of this big house by herself forever. It's irresponsible. The conversation shifted after that to the topic that would come to dominate every family gathering for the next year. What to do about Mom and her house? I sat there, invisible in my own living room, as my children discussed my future as if I weren't present. Should I move in with one of them? Should we look into assisted living facilities? Should we sell the house now while the market was good? I'm not selling my house, I said firmly. And I'm certainly not moving into assisted living. I'm 73, not 93, and I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Mom, this isn't about what you want. This is about being practical. You're going to need help eventually, and we're trying to plan ahead. When I need help, I'll ask for it. Will you? Margaret's voice dripped with skepticism. Because you've always been stubborn. You'll probably fall and break a hip before you admit you need assistance. The conversation ended badly, with Margaret leaving in a huff and Robert giving me a disappointed look that somehow felt worse than his sister's anger. Only Susan hugged me before leaving, whispering, "Don't let them bully you, Mom." But even she didn't speak up during the confrontation. That night I lay in bed unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom I'd shared with Thomas for decades. Was this it? Was this all I had to look forward to? Years of my children slowly tightening their control, making decisions for me, treating me like an inconvenience to be managed rather than a person with my own desires and dreams? The next morning I did something impulsive. I walked into town. Margaret would have had a fit if she'd known I'd walked the 1.5 miles instead of driving, convinced I'd somehow injure myself on the journey, and went into the travel agency on Main Street. Yes, a travel agency. I knew most people book trips online now, but I wanted to talk to a real person, someone who could help me navigate possibilities I barely understood. The young woman behind the counter, her name tag read Jessica, smiled warmly as I approached. Good morning. How can I help you today? I took a deep breath. I want to plan a trip. Wonderful. Where are you thinking of going? That question stopped me. Where did I want to go? After a lifetime of dreaming, I suddenly had too many answers and not enough clarity. Everywhere, I said, then laughed at how ridiculous that sounded. I'm sorry. I've never really traveled before. My husband and I always planned to, but we never. And then he passed away. I'm not even sure where to start. Jessica's expression softened with understanding. I'm so sorry for your loss. Let's start simple. Is there one place you've always dreamed of seeing? Just one, even if we end up planning something different. One place. I closed my eyes and immediately saw it. The image that had stayed with me from a magazine I'd read as a young wife, sitting in my kitchen while my children napped upstairs. New Zealand, I said. I've always wanted to see New Zealand. That's a wonderful choice, Jessica said enthusiastically. The landscapes are absolutely stunning. Are you thinking of going alone or with family? Alone. I said, and saying it out loud made it feel real and terrifying and thrilling all at once. Over the next hour, Jessica helped me understand what such a trip would entail. The flights. Oh God, the flights so long and intimidating. The accommodations. The activities. The costs. It was overwhelming, but with each detail she explained, each option she presented, I felt something growing inside me that I hadn't felt in years. Excitement. Possibility. The sense that my life wasn't over just because I was in my 70s, just because my husband had died, just because my children thought I should sit quietly in my house until it was my turn to pass away too. If you're enjoying this story, consider subscribing. There's so much more to come, and you won't want to miss what happens next. I didn't book the trip that day. I told Jessica I needed to think about it, to check my finances, to make sure this was really what I wanted. But as I walked home again, that mile and a half that Margaret thought would somehow kill me, I felt lighter than I had in years. By the time I reached my front door, my mind was made up. I was going to do this. I was going to travel, to see the world, to claim some of those dreams I'd deferred for a lifetime. I just had to tell my children. Looking back now, I realize I should have known how that conversation would go. I should have anticipated their reactions, their objections, their absolute conviction that they knew what was best for me better than I knew myself. But some part of me, the part that had raised them, that had sacrificed for them, that had loved them unconditionally for their entire lives, believed they would support me, that they would be happy for me. I was wrong. I invited all three of them over for dinner the following Sunday. I made Thomas's favorite pot roast, baked fresh rolls, set the table with the good china. I wanted the setting to be warm and family-oriented when I shared my news. As we ate, I listened to them talk about their lives, Margaret's frustrations with her teenage daughter, Robert's promotion at work, Susan's new hobby of watercolor painting. I waited for a lull in the conversation, then cleared my throat. I have something I want to share with you all, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me with varying degrees of attention. Margaret looked immediately suspicious, as if she'd been expecting me to announce something she'd need to argue against. I've been doing a lot of thinking since your father passed away, I continued. About life, about time, about all the things we planned to do but never got around to doing. And I've decided that I'm not going to wait anymore. I'm going to travel. Travel where? Robert asked, his tone merely curious. Everywhere, eventually. But I'm starting with New Zealand. I'm booking a 3-week trip for next month. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret set down her fork with such precision that it felt ominous. Robert and Susan exchanged glances. Then, as if a dam had burst, they all started talking at once. 3 weeks? Alone? Mom, that's insane. Have you lost your mind? Who's going to take care of the house? Margaret's voice rose above the others. Absolutely not. Mom, I'm not allowing this. Something in me went very cold and very hard at those words. You're not allowing it? I repeated quietly. That's right. It's completely irresponsible. You're 73 years old, for God's sake. You've never traveled internationally. You don't know anything about New Zealand. What if something happens to you? What if something happens to me here? I countered. Should I just lock myself in this house and wait to die? Don't be dramatic, Margaret snapped. This isn't about dying. This is about being realistic about your limitations. What limitations? I'm healthy. I'm mentally sharp. I'm financially comfortable thanks to your father's careful planning. What exactly is limiting me except your imagination? Robert tried to intervene. Mom, I think what Margaret is trying to say. I know exactly what Margaret is trying to say, I interrupted, my voice rising now despite my best efforts to stay calm. She's trying to say that I'm too old to have adventures, too old to make my own decisions, too old to do anything except sit in this house and wait for you all to visit me when it's convenient. Your place is in the home, Margaret said, her voice taking on that condescending tone I'd come to hate. You're a 73-year-old widow. Traveling alone to the other side of the world isn't appropriate. What will people think? Those words. Your place is in the home. As if being female and elderly meant I should be confined to these 4 walls. As if everything I'd ever wanted for myself was somehow inappropriate or shameful. The fury that rose in me then was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. What will people think? I said slowly. Are you actually asking me that? I'm 73 years old, Margaret. I think I'm past the point of living my life based on what people think. That's selfish, she fired back. What about us? What about your grandchildren? Don't we deserve to have you here, safe and available? Available. The word tasted bitter. Is that what I am to you? Just available? A convenience? Someone who should arrange her entire life around your schedules and needs. Susan finally spoke up, her voice small. Mom, maybe you could start with something smaller? A cruise, maybe? Or a trip within the country. That way we'd know you were safe. I don't need you to know I'm safe, I said, looking at each of them in turn. I need you to trust that I can take care of myself. I need you to be happy for me. To support me. Well, we can't do that, Margaret said flatly. This is a terrible idea, and if you go through with it, you're on your own. Don't expect us to come running when you get yourself into trouble. The dinner ended shortly after that, with Margaret storming out and her siblings trailing behind her like uncertain shadows. I sat alone in my dining room, surrounded by the good china and the remains of the pot roast no one had finished, and I cried. Not because I was going to cancel my trip. I'd already decided I wouldn't let them bully me out of it, but because it hurt that my own children couldn't be happy for me. That they saw my desire for adventure as selfishness rather than self-discovery. But beneath the hurt there was steel. I was done living my life according to other people's expectations. I was done making myself smaller so other people would feel more comfortable. If my children couldn't support me, then they'd just have to deal with their discomfort because I was going to New Zealand whether they liked it or not. The next morning, I returned to the travel agency and booked everything. 3 weeks in New Zealand starting with Auckland, then traveling down to Rotorua, Wellington, Queenstown and Milford Sound. Jessica helped me arrange everything: flights, accommodations, tours, travel insurance. When I handed over my credit card for the deposit, my hand was shaking, but not from fear. From excitement. From the realization that this was really happening. Margaret called me that evening, her voice cold and clipped. I heard from Robert that you actually booked this ridiculous trip. I did, I confirmed, refusing to apologize or explain. Then you should know that we won't be responsible for what happens. If you fall or get sick or lose your passport or get robbed, don't expect us to bail you out. I wouldn't dream of it, I said quietly, and hung up before she could continue. The weeks leading up to my departure were strange. Margaret and Robert barely spoke to me, communicating only through terse text messages about practical matters. Susan called a few times, trying to bridge the gap, but even she seemed uncertain about my decision. My friends from church were divided. Some were horrified that I'd be traveling alone at my age. Others were enviously supportive, living vicariously through my courage. I wish I had your nerve, my friend Dorothy said over coffee one afternoon. When Bill died, I thought about traveling too. But the kids were so worried, and eventually it just seemed easier to stay put. Is it easier? I asked her. Or does it just feel safer? She'd looked at me with such sadness then. What's the difference, Evelyn? I didn't have an answer for her, but I thought about that question a lot in the days before my trip. Maybe there wasn't a difference. Maybe safe and easy were the same thing when you'd given up on actually living. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not when there was still so much world to see, so much life to live. 3 days before my flight, Margaret showed up at my door unannounced. I let her in, wary of another confrontation, but she seemed different somehow. Tired maybe. Less certain. I want to try one more time to talk you out of this, she said, sitting down heavily on my couch. Then you're wasting your time, I replied, sitting across from her. Mom, I'm worried about you. Can't you understand that? You're my mother. The thought of you halfway around the world all alone, with no one to help if something goes wrong, it terrifies me. For the first time in our weeks of conflict, I heard genuine fear in her voice rather than just controlling anger. It softened me, but only slightly. Margaret, I understand that you're worried, I said carefully, but your worry doesn't give you the right to control my life. I'm taking every precaution. I have travel insurance. I have a phone that works internationally. I've memorized important contacts. I've researched everything thoroughly. I'm not going into this blindly. But why alone? Why not wait and take someone with you? I could go. We could turn it into a mother-daughter trip. The offer surprised me, but I shook my head. Because I need to do this alone. I need to prove to myself that I can. I've spent my entire life being someone's wife, someone's mother. I need to know who Evelyn is when she's just Evelyn. That's what I don't understand, Margaret said, frustration creeping back into her voice. You're 73. You already know who you are. Do I? I asked. I've never tested myself. I've never been anywhere alone. Never had to navigate a foreign country. Never had to rely entirely on myself. How can I know who I am when I've never been anything except what other people needed me to be? Your place is in the home, Margaret said again, but this time it sounded less like a command and more like a plea. That's what women of your generation do. You raised a family, you kept a home, you did everything right. Why isn't that enough? It was enough for a long time, I said honestly. It was enough when your father was alive and we had our plans. But he's gone and those plans died with him. Now I have to make new plans, and those plans include seeing the world while I still can. She left without understanding, and I knew she wouldn't. Some people are so afraid of change, so committed to the way things have always been, that they can't imagine choosing discomfort over familiarity. Margaret had built her entire identity around being responsible and practical and in control. My decision to travel alone threatened all of that, challenged her worldview about what was appropriate for elderly women, for mothers, for people who were supposed to be settling into a quiet decline. But I wasn't declining. I was just getting started. The night before my flight, I barely slept. I'd packed and repacked my suitcase 3 times, checked and rechecked my documents, run through my itinerary so many times I had it memorized. As I lay in bed watching the hours tick by, I kept waiting for the fear to overwhelm me, for second thoughts to creep in, for my children's warnings to echo loudly enough that I'd lose my nerve. But it didn't happen. Instead I felt calm, certain, ready. At 4 a.m, I got up and took a long shower. I dressed in comfortable travel clothes, double-checked my carry-on bag one final time, and called for the car service that would take me to the airport. I told my children my flight time, but I didn't expect any of them to see me off. Margaret and Robert had made their positions clear, and Susan, while sympathetic, wouldn't defy her siblings. So when my doorbell rang at 6 o'clock and I found Susan standing there with tears in her eyes, I was genuinely surprised. I couldn't let you leave without saying goodbye properly, she said, pulling me into a tight hug. I'm proud of you, Mom. I know Margaret and Robert don't understand, but I do. I think what you're doing is brave. Thank you, sweetheart. I whispered, my own eyes filling with tears. That means more than you know. I wish I was brave like you, she said. I wish I could stand up to Margaret the way you do. You can, I told her. Anytime you want to. You just have to decide that your own life matters more than keeping peace. She helped me load my suitcase into the car, hugged me one more time, and waved as I drove away. As I watched my house, my home of 50 years, disappear in the rearview mirror, I felt a complex tangle of emotions. Sadness at leaving, yes. Nervousness about what lay ahead. But more than anything, I felt exhilarated. Free. Like I was finally claiming a life that was entirely my own. The airport was busy even at this early hour. I checked my luggage, went through security, and found my gate with time to spare. I bought a terrible cup of coffee and a pastry I didn't really want and sat in the uncomfortable airport chairs, watching other travelers and wondering about their stories. Where were they going? Were they running towards something or away from something? Were any of them feeling what I was feeling, this heady mixture of terror and joy? When they called my boarding group, I stood up and got in line. My hands were shaking as I handed over my boarding pass, but the gate agent smiled warmly at me. Have a wonderful trip, she said. I intend to, I replied, and meant it with every fiber of my being. The plane was larger than I'd expected, and finding my seat felt like navigating a maze, but eventually I settled into my window seat in economy. I'd splurged on some things for this trip, but the long flight wasn't one of them. I'd be perfectly fine in a regular seat. As I buckled my seatbelt and watched the other passengers board, I pulled out my phone to send a quick text to Susan letting her know I'd made it to the plane safely. There was a message waiting from Margaret. Last chance to come to your senses. Your place is in the home. Not gallivanting around the world like some irresponsible teenager. When this ends badly, don't say I didn't warn you. I stared at that message for a long moment, feeling the familiar sting of her disapproval. Then I did something I'd never done before. I deleted it without responding. I wasn't going to let her poison this experience before it even began. I wasn't going to carry her disapproval with me to the other side of the world. Instead, I turned off my phone, tucked it into my purse, and looked out the window at the tarmac. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. As the plane pulled away from the gate and began taxiing toward the runway, I felt my heart rate increase. This was it. This was really happening. I was doing this. The takeoff was smoother than I'd expected. As the plane lifted into the air and the ground fell away beneath us, I pressed my face to the window and watched my city, my state, my familiar world become smaller and smaller until it disappeared beneath the clouds. And then there was nothing but sky and the future and the promise of adventure. The flight to Los Angeles was just the first leg. I had a layover there before the long haul to Auckland. 14 hours in the air, crossing the Pacific Ocean, hurtling toward a country I'd never seen, where I knew no one, where I'd have to navigate entirely on my own. The old Evelyn, the one who'd spent 50 years being careful and responsible and appropriate, would have been terrified. But I wasn't that Evelyn anymore. Or maybe I'd always been this Evelyn, underneath all the layers of expectation and duty. Maybe I was just finally meeting myself. During the layover in Los Angeles, I called Susan from the airport. She answered immediately, her voice anxious. "Mom? Are you okay? Did you make it?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm in LA waiting for my connection. How are things there?" "Margaret's been calling everyone, telling them you've lost your mind. She's making it sound like you've had some kind of breakdown." I laughed, though it wasn't particularly funny. "Of course she is. Let her talk. I'll be too busy having the adventure of a lifetime to care." "I wish I was there with you," Susan said wistfully. "Next time," I promised. "When I get back and tell you all about it, maybe you'll be inspired to take your own trip." "Maybe," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. Some people are born to adventure, and some people are born to watch others have adventures. I loved Susan dearly, but I knew which category she fell into. The flight from LA to Auckland was everything I'd feared and hoped for. Long, yes. Uncomfortable at times. But also magical. I watched movies I'd never had time for, read a novel cover to cover, talked to the woman sitting next to me, a New Zealander returning home from visiting her daughter in California. She gave me recommendations for places to eat in Auckland, warned me about the strength of the coffee, "It'll wake you right up, love, just you wait," and told me about her own late husband. "He died 5 years ago," she said. "Cancer. We'd planned to travel more after he retired, but we waited too long. By the time he was ready to go, he was too sick. Don't wait, that's my advice. Don't ever wait." "I'm not waiting anymore," I assured her. When the plane finally began its descent into Auckland, I was glued to the window, watching the landscape unfold beneath us. Green hills, sparkling water, a city that looked both modern and welcoming. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was it. I was actually here. I'd actually done it. Getting through customs was less intimidating than I'd feared. The officials were friendly, and soon I was collecting my luggage and heading out into the arrivals area of Auckland Airport. The air smelled different, cleaner, somehow crisper. Or maybe that was just my imagination, my excitement coloring everything with novelty. I'd arranged for a shuttle to my hotel, and the driver was waiting with a sign bearing my name. "Welcome to New Zealand, Mrs. Parker," he said cheerfully, loading my suitcase into the van. "First time visiting us?" "First time," I confirmed. "First time traveling internationally at all, actually." "Well, you've picked a beautiful place to start," he said. "I think you're going to love it here." And oh, how right he was. The next 3 weeks were a revelation. I saw things I'd only dreamed of. The geothermal wonders of Rotorua, where the earth itself seemed alive, steaming and bubbling and painted in otherworldly colors. The sophistication of Wellington, with its museums and waterfront and friendly locals who seemed genuinely pleased to chat with a visiting American widow. The adventure capital of Queenstown, where I did things I never imagined doing. A gentle helicopter ride over the Remarkables mountain range that left me breathless with wonder. And Milford Sound, where the fjords rose from the water like ancient sentinels, and I felt simultaneously insignificant and profoundly alive. But more than the places, it was the experience of navigating it all alone that transformed me. Every decision was mine. Every triumph, finding my way on the Auckland public transport system, ordering fish and chips from a local spot the way a Kiwi would, striking up conversations with strangers in cafes, was mine. And yes, there were challenges. I got lost in Wellington and had to ask for directions. I accidentally booked the wrong tour in Queenstown and had to sort it out with the company. I had a moment of panic in Rotorua when I thought I'd lost my passport. It was in the hotel safe. Exactly where I'd put it, but those 20 minutes of panic were real. Each challenge I overcame made me stronger. Each new place I explored made me braver. Each conversation I had with locals or fellow travelers made me realize how much of the world I'd been missing while I stayed safely in my comfortable home, living the life my children thought was appropriate for someone of my age and station. I posted pictures to Facebook throughout the trip, not to prove anything to my children, but because I wanted to share the beauty of what I was experiencing. Friends from church commented enthusiastically. A few acquaintances expressed concern. "Be careful, Evelyn. Don't take any risks." Margaret didn't comment at all, though I knew she was watching. She couldn't help herself. In Queenstown, I met a group of women around my age who were also traveling, 2 Americans, a Canadian and a British woman. We bonded over dinner one night, sharing our stories. All of them had faced similar resistance from family members who thought women our age should be content to stay home, to babysit grandchildren, to quietly accept the limitations of aging. "My son told me I was being selfish," the British woman Patricia said. "Selfish? For wanting to see a bit of the world before I pop off. As if I owe it to him to sit in my flat in Manchester waiting for his occasional visit. They think they're protecting us," the Canadian woman Marie added. "But really they're just limiting us. Keeping us small so they feel more comfortable." That conversation stayed with me. Keeping us small so they feel more comfortable. That was exactly what Margaret had been trying to do. My independence, my adventurousness, my refusal to accept her narrow vision of appropriate elderly behavior. It threatened her. It challenged her worldview. And rather than examining that worldview, she tried to change me. But I was done being changed to suit other people's comfort. Toward the end of my trip, I took a day trip to a small town on the coast. I can't even remember the name now, it was just a place the hotel concierge recommended, when I said I wanted to see something off the typical tourist path. I spent the day walking along the beach, watching the waves crash against black sand, feeling the wind in my hair. I found a small cafe and had the best coffee of my life. That Kiwi woman on the plane hadn't been exaggerating. I sat on a bench and read a book, occasionally looking up to watch the locals go about their day. At one point, an elderly man sat down next to me. He must have been in his 80s, weathered and lean with kind eyes. "Beautiful day," he commented. "Stunning," I agreed. "You're American?" "I am. Just visiting. This is my first international trip." "First?" He looked surprised. "What brought you to New Zealand for your first international adventure?" "A lifetime of waiting," I said honestly. "And a decision to stop waiting." He smiled at that. "My wife would have liked you. She was always saying we should stop waiting, stop planning for someday. But I was always too busy, too focused on work, too concerned with being responsible. She died 8 years ago, and you know what? All that responsibility, all that focus on someday, it doesn't mean much when someday never comes." "I'm sorry for your loss," I said. "I'm sorry for all the trips we didn't take," he replied. "Don't be like me. Don't wait until it's too late." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, 2 elderly people on a bench in a small New Zealand town, both carrying the weight of roads not taken in time that couldn't be reclaimed. But I felt lighter somehow knowing that I'd stopped waiting. That I was here, now living instead of just existing. When my 3 weeks in New Zealand came to an end, I was sunburned and exhausted and exhilarated. I'd filled 2 journals with observations and experiences. I'd taken hundreds of photos. I'd collected memories that I knew would sustain me for the rest of my life. But more than that, I'd discovered something crucial. I was capable. At 73 on my own, in a foreign country, I was not just capable but thriving. The flight home felt different than the flight out. I wasn't scared anymore. I was confident. I knew I could do this, not just travel but anything I set my mind to. Age was just a number, not a prison sentence. When I landed back in the States, Susan was waiting for me at the airport. She grabbed me in a fierce hug, tears streaming down her face. "I missed you so much," she said. "But Mom, your pictures, everything you shared, it looked amazing. I'm so happy you did this. Where are Margaret and Robert?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. They said they were busy. "But Mom, Margaret's been awful while you were gone. She kept saying you'd come back broken or sick, or having realized she was right. I think she's going to be really disappointed when she sees how happy you look." Susan was right about that. When I finally saw Margaret a few days after my return, she'd stopped by unannounced, no doubt to assess the damage she was sure my trip had caused. She looked almost angry that I seemed so well. "Well, you made it back in one piece," she said, her tone making it clear she wasn't entirely pleased about this. "I did more than that," I replied. "I had the time of my life." "I suppose you think this proves something," she said. "That you can just run off whenever you feel like it, abandoning your responsibilities." "What responsibilities, Margaret? I'm retired. My children are grown. This house doesn't need me here 24 hours a day. What exactly am I abandoning?" "Your place is not just in this home," I interrupted firmly. "My place is wherever I choose it to be. And right now, I'm choosing for it to be in lots of places. I'm already planning my next trip." Her face went pale. "Your next trip? You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. I'm thinking Thailand next. Maybe Japan after that. Morocco after that. I have a list, Margaret, of all the places I want to see before I die. And I intend to see every single one of them." "This is insane. You're 73 years old." "Yes," I agreed. "I'm 73 years old, I'm healthy, I'm financially stable, and I'm done living my life according to your rules. You can either be happy for me and support me, or you can continue being angry and controlling. But either way, I'm traveling. I'm seeing the world. I'm living my life." Margaret stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. "I don't even know who you are anymore," she said. "That's the wonderful thing," I replied with a smile. "I finally do." She left shortly after that, and I knew there would be more conversations, more arguments, more attempts to make me feel selfish or irresponsible. But I also knew that none of it would work. I'd crossed a threshold during those 3 weeks in New Zealand. I'd discovered that the world was bigger and more beautiful than I'd imagined, and that I was braver and more capable than I'd believed. Over the next few months, the dynamic in my family shifted dramatically. Margaret remained stubbornly opposed to my new lifestyle, though her arguments grew weaker and less frequent as it became clear I wasn't going to budge. Robert eventually came around, admitting that while he'd been worried, he was impressed by my independence. Susan became my biggest cheerleader, living vicariously through my adventures and talking about maybe someday taking a trip of her own. But the biggest change was in me. I started a blog documenting my travels, and to my surprise, it attracted a following, mostly women my age who'd been told similar things by their families, who'd been made to feel like their adventurous days were behind them. They wrote to me with gratitude, with their own stories, with questions about how I found the courage to defy expectations. "You showed me it was possible," one woman wrote. "My daughter keeps telling me I'm too old to travel alone. But seeing you do it gave me the courage to book my own trip. I'm going to Ireland next month. Somewhere I've dreamed of visiting since I was a little girl. Thank you for proving that it's never too late." Those messages meant everything to me. Each one was a reminder that my decision to travel wasn't just about me. It was about challenging the narrative that women of a certain age should fade into the background, should accept limitations, should prioritize everyone else's comfort over their own dreams. I did go to Thailand next, and it was everything I'd hoped for. Then Japan, which was even better. Morocco after that. Getting lost in the souks of Marrakesh, riding a camel into the Sahara, watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. Each trip built my confidence, expanded my worldview, connected me with fellow travelers who became friends. On a trip to Peru, my 8th major international trip in 3 years, I met a man named Henry. He was 76, a retired engineer from Boston, traveling alone through South America with nothing but a backpack and an infectious enthusiasm for life. We ended up joining the same tour group to Machu Picchu, And over the course of that week, we became friends. My kids think I've lost my mind, he told me over dinner one night in Cusco. They wanted me to move into a retirement community after my wife died. Play shuffleboard, watch TV, wait to die. But I told them the same thing you told yours. My place is where I choose it to be. We stayed in touch after that trip. He came to visit me at home, and I was amused to watch Margaret's reaction to me having a male friend. The idea that her 76-year-old mother might have romantic interest in someone seemed to scandalize her, which made me enjoy Henry's company even more. Henry and I traveled together sometimes after that. He joined me in Vietnam, I joined him in Portugal. But we also continued traveling alone when our interests diverged. The point wasn't to find another person to complete me or to take care of me. The point was to keep exploring, keep growing, keep refusing to accept limitations based on age or gender or other people's expectations. Now at 76, I've been to 23 countries across 5 continents. I've hiked portions of the Camino de Santiago in Spain. I've gone snorkeling in the Great Barrier Reef, which terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I've taken cooking classes in Italy, language lessons in France, and learned to tango in Argentina. I've celebrated my birthday on a beach in Greece, rung in the New Year at a temple in Cambodia, and watched the Northern Lights in Iceland. Margaret still doesn't fully approve, though she's stopped actively fighting me. I think she's realized it's futile. I'm going to do what I'm going to do regardless of her opinion. Robert is proud of me now, tells his friends about his adventurous mother with genuine affection. Susan finally took her own trip, a 2-week tour of Ireland, and came back glowing, talking about booking another trip soon. But the greatest change has been internal. I know myself now in a way I never did during all those years of being wife, mother, homemaker. I know I'm brave. I know I'm resilient. I know I can navigate foreign cities and foreign languages and foreign customs. I know I can make friends with strangers, can handle challenges, can adapt to the unexpected. I know that my place is not in the home. My place is in the world. Last month, I got an email from a woman named Jennifer. She was 68, recently widowed, and her children were telling her she was too old to travel alone to the places she'd always dreamed of seeing. I found your blog, she wrote, and I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for showing me that it's possible. Thank you for proving that our children don't get to define our limitations. Thank you for being brave enough to claim your own life. Because of you, I'm booking a trip to New Zealand. It's where I've always wanted to go, and I'm not waiting anymore. New Zealand. The place where I'd started my own journey of self-discovery, where I'd first proven to myself that age was just a number, and that the only real limitations were the ones we accepted. I wrote back to Jennifer immediately, sharing recommendations, encouragement, and one piece of advice. Don't let anyone tell you your place is in the home. Your place is wherever your heart leads you. She was brave enough to take the first step, even when her children told her she was being ridiculous, even when she was scared, even when it would have been easier to stay home and accept their narrow vision of what her life should look like. Because she took that step, I get to live this life. I get to wake up in different cities, to challenge myself constantly, to meet fascinating people from around the world. I get to know that when my time comes, whether that's next year or in 20 years, I won't have a list of regrets about places I never saw and adventures I never had. I'll have stories, memories, and the profound satisfaction of having lived fully until the very end. My children once told me my place was in the home. What they didn't understand was that the whole world could be my home if I was brave enough to claim it. And I am. Every single day, I choose adventure over comfort, growth over stagnation, possibility over limitation. They said my place was in the home. Instead, I traveled the world alone. And in doing so, I found not just new places but a new self, the self I was always meant to be. If only I'd had the courage to look for her sooner. The greatest gift of these last 3 years hasn't been the stamps in my passport or the photos on my wall. It's been the knowledge that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. It's never too late to claim your life. It's never too late to prove that age is just a number, and that the only real limits are the ones we accept. I'm 76 years old, and I'm just getting started. My next trip is to Antarctica, a continent I never imagined visiting, but why not? Why accept limitations that don't actually exist? Why let other people's fears become my prison? They told me my place was in the home. But I've learned something crucial. Home isn't a place. It's not four walls and a familiar address. Home is wherever you feel most alive, most yourself, most connected to the vast and beautiful world we're lucky enough to inhabit. And for me, that's everywhere. Every new country, every unexpected adventure, every moment of stepping outside my comfort zone and discovering I'm stronger than I knew. That's home. That's where I belong. They told me my place was in the home. They were wrong. My place is in the world, and I'm finally claiming it.